The dust storm howled like a vengeful spirit as Florence Abernathy stumbled through the doorway of the only saloon in Gila Bend, Arizona, collapsing against the threshold with eyes that had seen too much death for a woman of 22 years. The year was 1878, and the untamed wilderness of the Arizona Territory cared little for those who couldn't defend themselves against its harsh temperament and even harsher inhabitants. Blood trickled from a cut above her brow as she clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest. The tavern fell silent, all eyes turning to the bedraggled woman in the tattered blue dress that had once been fine but now hung in tatters around her slender frame. Her copper hair, usually pinned neatly, tumbled wildly around her shoulders, tangled with bits of desert brush and dried blood. "Water," she croaked, her voice cracking with the dryness of 3 days without proper drink. "Please." The barkeep hesitated only a moment before sliding a glass of cloudy water across the counter. Florence lunged for it, drinking greedily until rivulets ran down her chin, mixing with tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You're a long way from anywhere proper, miss," the barkeep observed, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Stagecoach drop you here." Florence lowered the glass, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Stagecoach was attacked. 2 days back. Indians, they said, but it wasn't. It was. Her voice trailed off as her eyes darted nervously to the windows. "They'll come for me. They always do." A man at the end of the bar shifted, his spurs jingling softly against the brass rail as he turned toward her. Beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, piercing blue eyes studied her with careful deliberation. His weathered duster was coated with the dust of the trail, and the colt at his hip bore the marks of frequent use. "Who's after you, miss?" His voice was deep, steady like the ground beneath their feet. Florence stared at him, weighing the risk of truth against the risk of silence. "Everyone who gets close to me," she finally whispered. The barkeep cleared his throat. "This here's Archer Kincaid, best tracker this side of the Gila River. If you're in trouble, he's the one to help." Archer Kincaid nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. He was younger than most men of his reputation, perhaps 30, with a face that might have been handsome had it not been carved into permanent vigilance by years under the punishing sun. "I don't need help," Florence replied, squaring her shoulders despite her obvious exhaustion. "I need a horse and directions to the nearest town with a telegraph." "That'd be Tucson," Archer replied. 3 days' ride east through Apache territory. Alone, you wouldn't make it half a day." He pushed away from the bar and approached her, stopping at a respectful distance. "What's got you running so hard, miss?" Florence swallowed hard, her hand tightening around the satchel. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Kincaid." A commotion outside drew their attention. The sound of approaching horses filled the air, followed by rough voices calling orders. Florence paled, her freckled skin turning ashen. "They found me," she whispered, panic edging into her voice. "They always find me." Archer's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw. Instead, he took Florence gently but firmly by the elbow and guided her toward the back of the saloon. "There's a storage room behind the bar. Go there. Don't make a sound." "You don't understand," Florence protested weakly, even as she allowed herself to be led away. "They'll hurt anyone who helps me. They always do." "Let me worry about that," Archer replied, his voice steady. "Go." The barkeep lifted a section of the counter and Florence ducked through, clutching her satchel tighter. As the hidden door closed behind her, she pressed her ear against it, listening as the saloon doors burst open. "We're looking for a woman," a harsh voice announced. "Red hair, traveling alone." "Seen her. Lots of women come through here," Archer replied casually. "Can't say I recall one matching that description recently." "She stole something valuable from my employer," the voice continued. There's a reward for her return, dead or alive. That's so. Archer's voice remained neutral. What'd she steal? That's not your concern, Cowboy. Just tell us if you've seen her. Florence held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she feared they might hear it through the door. Haven't seen any red-haired women in weeks, the barkeep offered. Last one through here was old Widow Jenkins, and her hair's gone white as snow. A moment of tense silence followed, broken by the sound of chairs scraping as patrons shifted uncomfortably. We'll be staying in town tonight, the voice finally said. If she shows up, there's $50 for whoever brings her to us at the boarding house. Mighty generous, Archer replied. Must be something precious she took. More than you can imagine, the man said before the sound of retreating footsteps signaled their departure. Florence remained frozen in the storage room, listening as the saloon gradually returned to its normal level of noise. When the door finally opened, she found herself staring up at Archer, whose expression had hardened. You have about 5 minutes to tell me what kind of trouble you're in before I decide whether to help you or turn you over to those men, he said quietly. Florence's chin trembled, but she lifted it defiantly. I didn't steal anything. Not from them anyway. I took back what was rightfully mine. And that would be, she hesitated, then carefully opened her satchel just enough to reveal an old, leather-bound book with strange symbols etched into its cover. My mother's journal. And this. She pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth, unwrapping it just enough to reveal a strange medallion made of what appeared to be silver, inscribed with the same curious symbols. Archer frowned. That's what they're willing to kill for. Some old book and a trinket. Florence rewrapped the medallion carefully. It's more than that. It's... She paused, her green eyes searching his face for something trust, perhaps, or understanding. Finding neither, she sighed. It doesn't matter, I need to keep moving. Those men will have the town watched, Archer warned. You won't get far. I've escaped worse, she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Let me help you, Archer offered, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. Something about this woman, her determination, perhaps, or the fear she was so clearly fighting stirred something protective in him that he'd thought long dead. Florence studied him, her gaze penetrating. Why would you risk your life for a stranger? Maybe I've got my own reasons for disliking men who hunt women, he replied simply. Or maybe I'm just curious about what makes that book worth killing for. A shadow of a smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. Curiosity is dangerous, Mr. Kincaid. So is traveling alone through Apache territory, he countered. My horse is strong enough for 2. We can leave at dawn before those men are stirring. Florence hesitated, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. Until Tucson, then, but there's something you should know. Her voice dropped to a whisper, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. I'm cursed, she whispered. Archer didn't laugh or dismiss her words as he might have expected. Instead, he held her gaze steadily. Then I'll break every curse with love, he said, the words coming unbidden to his lips, surprising him as much as her. Florence's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked truly afraid not of the men pursuing her, but of the promise in his words. You don't know what you're saying, she warned. Everyone who tries to help me ends up dead. My parents, my fiancé, the stagecoach driver, all dead because they were near me when. She trailed off, shaking her head. When what? Archer pressed. When the moon is full, she finished, her voice barely audible, like tonight. Archer glanced out the window at the rising full moon silvering the desert landscape. Well, he said after a moment, I've survived a lot of full moons in my time. One more won't hurt. You don't believe me, she said flatly. I believe you believe it, he replied carefully. And that's enough for now. Come on. The barkeep's wife has a room where you can rest. Tomorrow we ride for Tucson." Florence hesitated, then reluctantly followed him through the back door of the saloon and into the cool desert night. Above them, the full moon watched impassively as they crossed the small yard to a modest house where a lantern burned in the window. The barkeep's wife, Mrs. Holloway, was a kind-faced woman who asked no questions as she showed Florence to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. "Thank you," Florence said sincerely as the woman handed her a clean nightgown. "Sleep well, dear," Mrs. Holloway replied. "Mr. Kincaid will be keeping watch outside." Once alone, Florence sank onto the narrow bed, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. She placed the satchel beneath her pillow, her hand resting on it as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Outside, Archer took up position on the porch, his rifle across his knees as he watched the full moon climb higher in the sky. He wasn't sure why he'd offered to help this mysterious woman, or why he'd made such a bold declaration about breaking curses. He didn't believe in curses, not really. But there had been something in her eyes, a combination of fear and resignation that had stirred something within him. The night passed slowly. Twice, Archer spotted men from the group that had entered the saloon patrolling the streets, but they paid no particular attention to the barkeep's modest home. As dawn approached, he stood and stretched, working the stiffness from his limbs before quietly entering the house. Mrs. Holloway was already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of biscuits and coffee. She nodded toward the back room. She had nightmares, cried out several times. Poor thing. Archer frowned. "Did she say anything about why those men are after her?" The woman shook her head. "Not a word, but she's frightened, that much is clear." A noise from the doorway made them both turn. Florence stood there, dressed in her torn blue dress, her copper hair neatly braided and her satchel clutched in her hands. In the morning light, Archer could see her more clearly, the spray of freckles across her nose and cheeks, the deep green of her eyes, and the stubborn set of her jaw. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "I hope I didn't disturb your rest, Mrs. Holloway." "Not at all, dear. Come have some breakfast before you go." Florence glanced at Archer. "Is it safe?" He nodded. "For now. Those men are still in town, but they seem to be waiting for you to come to them rather than searching house by house." "They're probably conserving their energy," she murmured, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway. "They know the curse will do their work for them eventually." Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she placed a plate of biscuits on the table. Archer watched as Florence ate carefully, her movements precise and deliberate, like someone accustomed to proper society rather than frontier life. "You're not from around here," he observed. Florence shook her head. "Boston, originally. My father was a professor of antiquities at Harvard. My mother was his research assistant before they married." "And how did a Boston professor's daughter end up alone in Arizona territory?" A shadow crossed her face. "My parents were investigating certain artifacts, items believed to have unusual properties. When I was 16, they traveled to Egypt and brought back several such items, including the medallion. That's when the trouble began." "What kind of trouble?" Archer asked, his curiosity genuinely piqued. "Strange accidents at first. A colleague who examined the medallion fell down a flight of stairs the next day. A thief who tried to steal it from our home was found dead in an alley, his body unmarked but his face frozen in terror." She set down her coffee cup. "My parents dismissed these incidents as coincidences, but they became increasingly concerned as similar events continued to occur around other artifacts they'd collected. And they believed these objects were cursed." Archer couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "My father was a man of science. He preferred to think of it as an unknown property of the materials, something that could eventually be explained through study. Florence's voice grew softer. My mother was less convinced. She began keeping detailed records of every incident, looking for patterns. That's what's in her journal. And what did she find? The effects were strongest during the full moon, and they seemed to focus on whoever possessed the medallion. Florence's eyes met his. 3 years ago, during a full moon, our house caught fire. Both my parents were trapped inside. I survived only because I was staying with a friend that night. Mrs. Holloway made a sympathetic noise, but Archer remained silent, processing the story. After their deaths, I was engaged to my father's protege, David. He didn't believe in the curse either, but he was fascinated by the medallion's properties. He convinced me to let him study it. Her voice caught. The next full moon, he was found dead in his laboratory. No marks, no explanation, just like the thief. And you believe you're cursed because you possess this medallion? Archer asked carefully. I know I am, Florence replied firmly, but I can't simply throw it away or give it to someone else. According to my mother's research, that only transfers the curse. It doesn't end it. And in the wrong hands, it could be used deliberately to harm others. Like the men who are following you, she nodded. They work for a collector named Harrington. He's obsessed with objects like the medallion, things with power he doesn't understand but wants to control. He learned about my parents' collection and has been hunting me ever since their deaths. Archer considered this for a long moment, then rose from the table. We should go. It's a 3-day ride to Tucson if we push hard, and I'd like to put as much distance between us and those men as possible before they realize you're gone. Florence stood as well, straightening her shoulders with resolve. Mr. Kincaid, I appreciate your help, but I must be clear. The danger isn't just from Harrington's men. The full moon has passed, but the curse doesn't sleep. Strange things happen around me. People get hurt. I'll take my chances, he replied simply. Mrs. Holloway pressed a bundle of food into Florence's hands. For the journey. And here. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a simple brown dress and shawl. These will serve you better than those torn things. Florence accepted the gifts with genuine gratitude, changing quickly while Archer checked his horse and gathered supplies. When she emerged from the house in the practical brown dress, her red hair covered by the shawl, she looked like any frontier woman except for the intensity in her green eyes and the leather satchel she refused to relinquish. They left Gila Bend as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, riding double on Archer's sturdy bay gelding. Florence sat behind him, her arms reluctantly encircling his waist to keep her balance. They traveled in silence for the first few hours, both alert for signs of pursuit. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horse and eat some of Mrs. Holloway's provisions, Archer was satisfied they weren't being followed, at least not yet. They'll figure it out eventually, Florence said, echoing his thoughts as she nibbled on a biscuit. Harrington's men are persistent. So am I, Archer replied. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him all morning. This medallion, may I see it? Florence tensed visibly, but after a moment's consideration, reached into her satchel and withdrew the cloth-wrapped object. Carefully, she unwrapped it, revealing a silver disc about the size of a pocket watch, etched with symbols that seemed to shift subtly in the sunlight. Archer leaned closer, fascinated despite his skepticism. What do the symbols mean? My mother believed they were a form of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, but not like any recorded by modern scholars. She thought they might relate to Sekhmet, a goddess associated with both healing and destruction. Florence traced one of the symbols with her fingertip. This one represents the moon, and this one means blood or life force. Together, they form a warning about the moon drawing out life. Archer studied the medallion without touching it. And you believe this thing is responsible for all those deaths? I know it sounds impossible, Florence admitted, rewrapping the medallion carefully. If I hadn't witnessed it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. I've seen things on the frontier that defy explanation, Archer said slowly. Apache medicine men who could call rain from clear skies. Navajo healers who could draw poison from wounds. Maybe there are forces beyond our understanding. Florence looked at him with surprise. That's not the reaction I expected. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm full of surprises, Miss Abernathy. They continued eastward, following the course of the Gila River where possible, though Archer often led them away from the obvious path to reduce the chances of being tracked. As the day wore on, Florence gradually relaxed against his back, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling her into a state of cautious ease. "You never said why you're helping me," she ventured as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western horizon. Archer was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, 5 years ago I was a deputy marshal in Prescott. I was escorting a witness to a trial, a young woman who'd seen a powerful man commit murder. We were ambushed. I survived. She didn't. "I'm sorry," Florence said softly. "I swore I'd never fail to protect someone in my care again," he continued, his voice flat. "Especially not from men who think their money and power put them above the law. Is that why you left the marshal service?" "That's part of it," he acknowledged. "The other part is that I discovered my superior had been paid to reveal our route to the ambushers. The corruption went higher than I could fight, so I turned in my badge and headed south." "And became a tracker instead," Florence finished. "It's honest work. I choose who I track and why." He glanced back at her. "And occasionally who I help escape." As twilight descended, Archer guided the horse into a sheltered canyon where a small spring provided fresh water. "We'll camp here for the night," he decided, helping Florence dismount. She winced as her feet touched the ground, unaccustomed to long hours of riding. Archer pretended not to notice, preserving her dignity as she stretched discreetly while he tended to the horse. "Can we risk a fire?" she asked, looking at the gathering darkness with apprehension. "Small one," he replied. "We're far enough off the main trails that it shouldn't attract attention, and the canyon walls will hide most of the light." As Florence gathered dry branches for kindling, Archer cleared a space for the fire and laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the prospective flame. The domesticity of the scene struck Florence suddenly. How natural it felt to work alongside this man she'd known for less than a day. Once the fire was crackling softly, casting warm light on the canyon walls, they ate a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits, washing it down with water from the spring. "Tell me more about this curse," Archer said as they finished eating. "Your mother's journal, does it explain how to break it?" Florence sighed, pulling the leather-bound book from her satchel. She was still researching that when she died. According to her notes, most curses have specific conditions for their breaking: a ritual to perform, a sacrifice to make, or a specific length of time to endure. And this one? She believed it might require returning the medallion to its original resting place in Egypt, Florence said, flipping through the journal's pages. But there was another possibility. She mentioned briefly something about a love pure enough to withstand death itself. Archer raised an eyebrow. "That sounds rather poetic for a woman of science." A small smile touched Florence's lips. "My mother had a romantic streak beneath her scholarly exterior. My father used to tease her about it." Her smile faded, "But I've never put much stock in that theory. Even if such a love existed, I couldn't ask anyone to risk their life to test it." "Yet here you are, letting me help you," Archer observed. "That's different," Florence insisted. "You're guiding me to Tucson, not loving me." A flush crept into her cheeks at the words. "Fair enough," Archer conceded, though something in his expression suggested the idea wasn't entirely unwelcome. "What will you do in Tucson?" "Telegraph my father's colleague at the British Museum. He's been researching similar artifacts and might have new information about breaking the curse." She hugged her knees to her chest. "And then? I don't know, keep running, I suppose." "That's no way to live," Archer said quietly. "It's the only way I can live without endangering others," she replied, her voice equally soft. "You've been kind, Mr. Kincaid, but after Tucson we must part ways, for your own safety." Archer studied her across the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across her determined face. "We'll see," was all he said. As the night deepened, Florence curled up in her bedroll, the satchel tucked securely beneath her head. Archer remained sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch as he had the previous night. "You should sleep too," Florence murmured, her eyes already growing heavy. "I will." "Later," he promised. In the soft glow of the dying fire, with the stars spread like diamonds across the vast Arizona sky, Florence drifted into sleep, feeling safer than she had in years despite the dangers she knew surrounded them. Archer watched her sleep for a long while, pondering the strange turn his life had taken in just 24 hours. He didn't fully believe in curses, but he couldn't deny the genuine fear he'd seen in Florence's eyes, or the fact that dangerous men were pursuing her, regardless of whether supernatural forces were involved. Something about her drew him in, her courage, her determination to protect others from her supposed curse, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. It had been a long time since Archer had allowed himself to care about anyone. The pain of failure was too great. Yet here he was, risking his life for a woman he barely knew, making bold declarations about breaking curses with love. He shook his head at his own foolishness. Love wasn't something that happened in a day, no matter what the dime novels claimed. Yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Florence, a connection that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. As the night wore on, Archer finally allowed himself to doze, his back against a boulder, still facing the canyon entrance. His sleep was light, his senses attuned to any unusual sound that might signal danger. It was the horse's nervous whicker that woke him just before dawn. Archer's eyes snapped open, his hand already on his rifle as he scanned the graying darkness. The horse stamped anxiously, tugging at its tether as it stared toward the canyon entrance. Moving silently, Archer crept to the edge of their camp, keeping low as he peered around a boulder. In the dim pre-dawn light, he could make out several dark shapes moving along the ridge above the canyon riders, moving slowly but deliberately, following the course of the canyon. Harrington's men had found their trail. Archer slipped back to the camp, kneeling beside Florence and covering her mouth gently with his hand as he woke her. Her eyes flew open, momentary panic giving way to recognition as she saw his face. He removed his hand and put a finger to his lips, then leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Riders on the ridge. We need to move." Quietly. Florence nodded, her face pale but composed as she quickly rolled up her bedroll and secured her satchel. Archer doused the remaining embers of their fire with sand, then led the horse deeper into the canyon, away from the approaching riders. The canyon narrowed as they proceeded, eventually opening into a broader wash scattered with boulders and scrub brush. Archer helped Florence mount, then swung up behind her, taking the reins and guiding the horse through the wash at a careful pace that wouldn't kick up telltale dust. "How did they find us so quickly?" Florence whispered. "They're good trackers," Archer replied grimly. "Or they have someone helping them who knows these lands." They rode in tense silence as the sun rose, turning the eastern sky into a blaze of orange and gold. Archer kept them moving steadily eastward but away from the main trails. following game paths and dry washes whenever possible to minimize their tracks. By mid-morning, with no sign of immediate pursuit, they paused in a grove of cottonwoods beside a small tributary of the Gila River. While the horse drank, Archer climbed a rocky outcrop to scan their back trail with a small brass spyglass. "I don't see them," he reported as he rejoined Florence, "but that doesn't mean they're not still following." Florence nodded, her face drawn with worry as she refilled their canteens from the clear stream. "This is exactly what I feared," she said softly. "I've put you in danger." "I put myself in danger," Archer corrected her, "and I'm still alive, curse or no curse." "The full moon has passed," she reminded him, "but the medallion's influence isn't limited to those nights. It's just stronger then. If you truly believed the medallion would kill me for helping you, you wouldn't have accepted my help," Archer observed, catching her gaze. "Some part of you hopes the curse can be broken or that it isn't as powerful as you fear." Florence looked away. "Hope is dangerous, Mr. Kincaid. I've learned that the hard way." They continued their journey, pushing harder now that they knew they were being pursued. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled eastward, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees. As they rode, Florence shared more about her life before the curse, her childhood in Boston, her father's passion for archaeology, her own aspirations to follow in her parents' footsteps as a scholar. Archer found himself charmed by her intelligence and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of ancient civilizations and their mysteries. In turn, he told her about growing up in Texas, his years as a ranger before becoming a deputy marshal, and his life since leaving the law behind. He was more reserved in his storytelling, the habits of a solitary life making personal revelations difficult, but Florence listened with genuine interest to what little he shared. By late afternoon, they had covered impressive ground, but the horse was tiring beneath their combined weight. As they crested a hill overlooking a small valley, Archer spotted a weathered cabin nestled among the trees beside a small creek. "Looks abandoned," he observed, studying the structure through his spyglass. "No smoke from the chimney, no livestock in the corral. Is it safe to stop?" Florence asked, eyeing the position of the sun as it sank toward the western horizon. "The horse needs rest," Archer replied, "and we could both use shelter for the night." They approached the cabin cautiously, Archer with his rifle ready as they circled the small homestead. There were signs of recent habitation, a stack of chopped wood beside the door, a garden gone to seed but not yet completely wild, but no indication of the current residents' whereabouts. "Hello, the house," Archer called as they approached the front door. When no response came, he handed the reins to Florence and carefully pushed the door open, rifle raised. The interior was simple but neat, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A layer of dust covered everything, suggesting the occupants had been gone for at least a few weeks. "Looks like whoever lived here left in a hurry," Archer observed, noting the dishes still on the table and clothes hanging from pegs on the wall. "But they took what mattered, no personal items, no photographs." "Maybe they were running too," Florence said quietly, stepping into the cabin and looking around with a mix of caution and relief. "Maybe." Archer checked the small root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor, finding a few preserves and dried goods still intact. "We've got food, shelter, and water. We'll rest here tonight and leave at first light." While Florence cleaned the dust from the cabin, Archer tended to the horse, discovering a small supply of oats in the lean-to stable behind the house. He then checked their surroundings carefully, ensuring they hadn't been followed to this temporary haven. As dusk fell, They shared a simple meal of beans and preserved peaches found in the cellar, sitting at the table in a domestic scene that felt strangely comfortable despite their precarious situation. "This is nice," Florence admitted, looking around the humble cabin. "Having walls around us again." "Don't get used to it," Archer warned. "Tomorrow will be another hard day of riding." "I know." She set down her spoon with a sigh. "I keep thinking about what happens after Tucson. If my father's colleague has no new information, I'm not sure what I'll do next." "You could go to San Francisco," Archer suggested. "It's a big city, easy to disappear in. Or even back east, where Harrington might not think to look for you." Florence shook her head. "I've tried hiding. It doesn't work, not for long. The curse finds a way to create chaos around me, and that chaos attracts attention." She looked down at her hands. "I'm tired of running, Mr. Kincaid, tired of being alone." "Archer," he said quietly. She looked up, confusion in her eyes. "What? Call me Archer." "After everything we've shared, Mr. Kincaid seems unnecessarily formal." A small smile curved her lips. "Archer, then. And I'm Florence." "Florence," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "A beautiful name for a brave woman." Her cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "I don't feel very brave most days, just desperate." "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Archer said. "It's about facing it anyway. And you've been facing your fears alone for years now. That takes a special kind of bravery." Their eyes met across the table, held for a moment longer than necessary. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Florence broke the contact first, rising to clear their plates. "We should sleep." "As you said, tomorrow will be a hard day." Archer nodded, standing as well. "You take the bed, I'll sleep by the fireplace." "No, I couldn't, I insist," he interrupted gently. "I'm used to sleeping rough. One night on a wooden floor won't kill me." Florence hesitated, then nodded in acceptance. "Thank you." As night settled fully around the cabin, Archer built a small fire in the fireplace, more for comfort than necessity in the mild Arizona spring. Florence sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her copper hair with a comb she'd found among the abandoned belongings. "May I ask you something?" she ventured after a comfortable silence. "Of course." "When I told you I was cursed, why did you say what you did, about breaking every curse with love?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her curiosity and perhaps a hint of hope. Archer stared into the fire, considering his answer. "Honestly, I don't know, the words just came to me." He looked up at her. "But I meant them." "You don't even know me," she pointed out. "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know you're willing to live a life of solitude to protect others. I know you're intelligent and determined. I know you face your fears with dignity." He paused. "And I know that when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing better." Florence's brush stilled in her hair. "Even knowing the danger, especially knowing the danger," he affirmed. "Some things are worth risking everything for." Their gazes held across the room, the crackling fire and the soft chirp of crickets outside the only sounds in the charged silence. Finally, Florence set down her brush, her hands trembling slightly. "You should rest," Archer said gently, breaking the moment. "We have a long journey ahead of us." Florence nodded, slipping beneath the quilt on the narrow bed. "Good night, Archer." "Good night, Florence." Archer settled himself on the floor near the fireplace, his rifle within easy reach as he pulled a blanket over himself. He listened as Florence's breathing gradually deepened and slowed, signaling she had fallen asleep. Only then did he allow himself to close his eyes, though his senses remained alert even in sleep. In the deepest part of the night, he was awakened by a soft sound, a whimper that morphed into a strangled cry. Florence was thrashing in the bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Archer moved to her side, hesitating briefly before gently touching her shoulder. "Florence," he called softly. "Wake up. You're dreaming." Her eyes flew open, wild with terror as she gasped for breath. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize him, her gaze darting around the darkened cabin. "It's all right," he soothed. "You're safe, it was just a dream." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "No need to apologize," he assured her. "Do you want to talk about it?" Florence sat up, drawing her knees to her chest beneath the quilt. "It's always the same dream. I'm surrounded by people I care about, and one by one, they fall dead at my feet. Their faces twist in agony, and they reach for me, blaming me for their deaths." Her voice caught. "The worst part is, they're right to blame me." "No," Archer said firmly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You didn't create this curse. You're its victim as much as anyone." "But I survive while others die," she countered. "How is that fair?" "It isn't," he agreed. "Nothing about this situation is fair, but that doesn't make it your fault." In the dim glow of the dying fire, he could see tears glistening in her eyes. Without thinking, he reached out to brush one away as it slid down her cheek. His touch was gentle, his calloused thumb surprisingly soft against her skin. Florence caught her breath at the contact, her eyes widening slightly. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the simple touch connecting them more intimately than words could have done. "Try to sleep," Archer finally said, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't ready to name. "I'll be right here if the nightmares return." She nodded, lying back down but keeping her eyes on his face. "Thank you, Archer, for everything." He returned to his place by the fire, but sleep eluded him for the remainder of the night as he pondered the complex emotions stirring within him. By dawn, he had reached a decision, one that would likely change the course of both their lives. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin's small windows, Archer roused himself and began preparing for their departure. Florence joined him soon after, her face betraying her own lack of restful sleep, but her manner composed and determined. They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining preserved food, then gathered their belongings and prepared the horse for the day's journey. "We should reach Tucson by nightfall if we push hard," Archer said as he secured their bedrolls behind the saddle. Florence nodded, clutching her satchel close to her chest as she always did when they prepared to move. "And then," Archer turned to face her, his expression serious, "and then I have a proposition for you." Her eyebrows rose in question. "What kind of proposition?" "I've been thinking about your situation," he began, "about the curse and Harrington's men and everything you've told me, and I've realized something important." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "You don't have to face this alone anymore." "Archer," she started, a warning in her voice. "Hear me out," he interrupted gently. "I believe there's a way to break this curse, and I want to help you find it, not just as your guide to Tucson, but beyond that." Florence shook her head, taking a step back. "I can't ask that of you. The risk isn't yours to decide for me," he finished. "I'm a grown man, Florence. I've faced death more times than I can count. If there's even a chance we can end this curse, it's worth trying." "And if we can't?" she challenged. "If the only solution is to return the medallion to Egypt as my mother believed?" "That's a journey halfway around the world, fraught with its own dangers." "Then we go to Egypt," Archer replied simply, as if suggesting a trip to the next town over. Florence stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do this? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Archer stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. "Because in 2 days, I've come to care for you more than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. Because I see the pain and loneliness you carry, and I want to help lift that burden. And because—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. Because I meant what I said about breaking curses with love. Florence's breath caught, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception or uncertainty. Finding none, she closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by emotions she'd kept carefully locked away for years: hope, longing, fear of loss. "I can't promise you safety," she whispered. "I can't even promise you tomorrow." "I'm not asking for promises," Archer replied. "Just a chance to try." Florence opened her eyes, a new resolve hardening within them. "If we do this, if you truly want to help me break this curse, then we do it together, as equals. No more of me following while you lead. We face whatever comes side by side." A slow smile spread across Archer's face, the first true smile Florence had seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard edges and lighting his blue eyes with warmth. "Deal," he said, extending his hand to her. She took it, her smaller hand fitting perfectly within his larger one. The simple handshake sealed an agreement that went far beyond words, committing them both to a path neither could fully foresee. "Now," Archer said, not releasing her hand, "let's get to Tucson and find out what your father's colleague knows about breaking curses." Florence nodded, a tentative smile touching her lips. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. They mounted the horse together, but this time, the dynamics were subtly different. Though Florence still sat behind Archer, her arms around his waist felt less like a necessity for balance and more like an embrace freely given. As they rode away from the abandoned cabin, neither looked back, their focus now firmly on the road ahead and the future they might forge together. The journey to Tucson proceeded without immediate incident, though Archer remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. They talked more openly now, the barriers between them lowering with each mile traveled. Florence shared details of her research into the medallion, how her mother had traced its origins to a temple dedicated to Sekhmet near modern-day Luxor, and how it had been part of a ritual set used by priestesses to channel the goddess's powers of both healing and destruction. The ancient Egyptians believed Sekhmet could bring plagues upon their enemies, but also cure those she favored, Florence explained as they paused to rest the horse beside a small desert spring. The medallion was supposedly used to focus her power during certain celestial alignments, particularly full moons. "And your mother's journal, does it explain how the priestesses controlled this power?" Archer asked, refilling their canteens from the spring. "Not entirely. Some pages are damaged or missing." Florence frowned in concentration, but there are references to a balancing element, something that had to be used in conjunction with the medallion to keep its power in check. Another artifact, possibly. Or it could be a ritual, a specific set of words or actions. She sighed in frustration. "That's why I need to speak with Professor Thornton at the British Museum. He's been studying similar artifacts and might have information my parents never discovered." As the afternoon wore on, the distant outlines of Tucson appeared on the horizon, a sprawling settlement nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountain ranges. The sight brought mixed emotions for both travelers: relief at reaching their destination safely, but also apprehension about what might await them there. "We should be careful in town," Archer advised as they approached the outskirts. "Harrington's men might have telegraphed ahead to have people watching for you." Florence nodded, pulling her shawl lower over her distinctive copper hair. "Where will we stay?" "I know a place, a small boarding house run by a widow who doesn't ask questions. It's off the main streets, so less likely to be watched." The sun was setting as they rode into Tucson, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The town was larger than Gila Bend, with several proper streets lined with businesses, a courthouse, and even a small theater advertising traveling shows. They kept to the back streets, avoiding the busier areas around the saloons and hotels where strangers would be noticed. Mrs. Rodriguez's boarding house was exactly as Archer had described, a modest adobe building set back from the street, with a small courtyard shaded by a large mesquite tree. The widow herself was a dignified woman of about 60, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Kincaid," she greeted him with a slight smile. "It has been some time." "Too long, Mrs. Rodriguez," Archer replied with genuine warmth. "My friend and I need lodging for a few days, discreetly." The woman's gaze shifted to Florence, assessing her briefly before nodding. "I have 2 rooms at the back, very private, very quiet." "Thank you," Florence said sincerely. Once they were settled in their adjacent rooms, Archer outlined their next steps. "Tomorrow morning, you'll go to the telegraph office to contact Professor Thornton. I'll escort you there, but wait outside. No need to have us both seen together in case someone's watching." Florence agreed to the plan, though the thought of separating from Archer, even briefly, made her unexpectedly anxious. They shared a simple dinner in Florence's room, speaking in low voices about their situation. "If Professor Thornton has information that can help us break the curse, what then?" Florence asked, setting aside her empty plate. "Then we follow whatever lead he gives us," Archer replied. "Whether that means finding another artifact, performing some ritual, or—" he hesitated, "or traveling to Egypt," Florence finished for him. "Yes, if that's what it takes." She studied his face in the lamplight, still marveling at his willingness to commit to such an uncertain path. "And if he has no new information, if we're at another dead end," Archer considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than discouraged. "Then we keep searching. Your parents spent years studying these artifacts. There must be other scholars, other sources of information we can pursue." "It could take a lifetime," Florence warned. "So be it," Archer replied simply. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver through Florence, not of fear, but of something deeper, more primal. "Archer," she said softly, "I need to ask you something important." He nodded, waiting. If we find a way to break this curse, what then? For us, I mean." The question had been building within her since their conversation at the abandoned cabin, this tentative hope for something beyond survival. Archer didn't answer immediately, his blue eyes searching hers as if seeking permission for complete honesty. Finally, he reached across the small table between them, taking her hand in his. "I can't predict the future, Florence. I don't know what breaking this curse might require of us. But I do know that meeting you has awakened something in me I thought was dead, the capacity to care deeply for another person, to want to build something meaningful together." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "If we break this curse, I hope we'll have the chance to discover what that something might be, together." Florence felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, tears not of sorrow but of cautious joy. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." The moment stretched between them, intimate and full of promise. Archer's eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her gaze, the unspoken question clear in his expression. Before either could act on the impulse, a sharp noise from the street outside, the sound of approaching horses and men's voices, broke the spell. Archer was on his feet instantly, moving to the window and carefully peering around the edge of the curtain. "Riders," he reported tersely. "4 of them, stopping at the hotel down the street." Florence tensed. "Can you see if it's Harrington's men?" "Too dark to make out faces," Archer replied, continuing to watch. "But they're trail-worn, like they've been riding hard. Could be coincidence." "Or it could be them," Florence finished, her hand automatically going to the satchel that never left her side. "Either way, we proceed with caution," Archer decided, stepping back from the window. Tomorrow, we go to the telegraph office as planned, but we'll be extra vigilant. Florence nodded, though anxiety had replaced the warmth of moments before. Archer noticed the change in her demeanor and moved back to her side, taking her hands in his. "We'll be all right," he assured her. "They don't know where we are, and by the time they check every boarding house and hotel in town, we'll have our information and be gone." "I hope you're right," she replied, trying to draw strength from his confidence. After Archer retired to his own room, Florence prepared for bed, washing her face in the basin of water Mrs. Rodriguez had provided and changing into a clean nightgown the widow had lent her. As she braided her hair for the night, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand, really seeing herself for the first time in days. The woman who looked back at her was changed, somehow still wary, still burdened, but with a new light in her green eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope, she realized. Archer had given her hope, and perhaps something more. Morning came with the bustle of a town awakening, wagons rattling on the streets, merchants opening their shops, the distant whistle of a train arriving at the station. Florence dressed in her borrowed brown dress, pinning her hair up and covering it with the shawl, before securing the medallion and journal in her satchel. Archer was already waiting in the small dining room where Mrs. Rodriguez served breakfast to her lodgers. He looked refreshed despite the early hour, his hair damp from washing and his beard neatly trimmed. "You look nice," Florence said as she joined him at the table, the simple compliment feeling strangely significant. "As do you," he replied with a small smile. "Ready for our errand?" She nodded, though butterflies fluttered in her stomach at the thought of the telegraph office and the message that might change their lives. After a quick breakfast, they set out, keeping to the quieter streets as they made their way toward the town center. Archer walked slightly ahead, alert for any sign of danger, while Florence followed a few paces behind, her head lowered beneath her shawl to avoid drawing attention. The telegraph office was located on a side street near the courthouse, a modest building with a sign proclaiming Western Union Telegraph Company above the door. As planned, Archer stopped short of the entrance. "I'll wait here," he said quietly. "Be quick, but thorough. Make sure Professor Thornton understands the urgency." Florence nodded, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that conveyed both gratitude and affection. Then she straightened her shoulders and entered the telegraph office alone. The interior was plain but efficient. A counter separated the public area from the operator's desk, where a young man in shirt sleeves sat before the clicking telegraph key. A few wooden chairs provided seating for those waiting to send or receive messages. Florence approached the counter, relieved to find no other customers present. "Good morning. I need to send an urgent message to London, England, the British Museum." The operator nodded, pulling a blank form from beneath the counter. "Name of recipient: Professor Edward Thornton, Department of Egyptology, British Museum." "And your message, madam?" He poised his pencil above the form. Florence had carefully composed her message during the night, balancing the need for detail against the cost of a transatlantic telegram. Professor Thornton, daughter of James and Margaret Abernathy. Urgent information needed regarding Sekhmet medallion and curse. Have mother's incomplete journal. Need method to break curse or neutralize effects. Reply paid. Florence Abernathy, General Delivery, Tucson, Arizona Territory. The operator counted the words, calculating the cost. "That'll be $5, madam. International rates." Florence reached into her satchel, passed the medallion and journal to where she kept her dwindling supply of money. As she counted out the bills, the door to the telegraph office opened behind her. "Remember to include the reference to the 1873 excavation," a familiar voice said clearly. He'll know which medallion we mean then. Florence froze, her blood turning to ice as she recognized the voice, David's voice. But David was dead. She'd identified his body herself 3 years earlier. Slowly, she turned, her hand still in her satchel, now gripping the medallion as if it might protect her. The man in the doorway was indeed David Walker, her former fiancé, supposedly dead these 3 years. He looked older, his once boyish face now leaner and harder, but it was unmistakably him. "Hello, Florence," he said, a smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his cold eyes. "What a remarkable coincidence finding you here." "You're dead," Florence whispered, backing against the counter. "I saw your body." David's smile widened. "A necessary deception, I'm afraid, for both our safety." He glanced at the telegram form on the counter. "Contacting old Thornton, are we? I should have known you'd turn to him eventually." The telegraph operator looked between them in confusion. "Madam, do you still want to send this message?" Before Florence could answer, the door opened again and 3 more men entered, the same men who had searched for her in Gila Bend. One of them grinned nastily when he spotted her. "Got her, boss," he said to David. "Just like you said." Understanding crashed over Florence like a wave. "You're working for Harrington," she accused, her voice stronger now as shock gave way to anger. "You faked your death, let me believe the curse had killed you, while you were betraying everything my parents worked for." David's expression hardened. "Your parents were fools, Florence. They had artifacts of immense power at their fingertips and were content to merely study them." He stepped closer. "Harrington understands the true value of such items, as do I." "The medallion killed them," Florence insisted. "Just as it will kill you if you try to use it." "The medallion didn't kill your parents," David replied coldly. "I did. The fire was convenient, destroying their notes and making their deaths appear accidental while securing the medallion for Harrington." Florence staggered as if physically struck, her mind reeling with this new horror. "You murdered them." "I prefer to think of it as advancing scientific progress," David replied smoothly. "Now be a good girl and hand over the satchel. We know you have the medallion and the journal." The telegraph operator had backed away from the counter, his eyes wide with fear as one of the men drew a pistol. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," he stammered. "There won't be any," David assured him, "as long as Miss Abernathy cooperates." Florence clutched the satchel tighter, her mind racing. Where was Archer? Had they caught him outside? Was he even now lying dead in some alley while she faced her parents' murderer alone? As if in answer to her unspoken question, a shot rang out from the street, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One of David's men turned toward the door, only to be met with another shot that caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around before he collapsed to the floor. "Ambush!" Another of the men yelled, drawing his gun and firing blindly through the front window. In the chaos that followed, Florence saw her opportunity. She ducked behind the counter, pulling the terrified telegraph operator down with her as bullets flew overhead. "Is there a back door?" she asked urgently. The young man nodded, pointing toward a narrow hallway behind the operator's desk. "Through there leads to the alley." "Go," she ordered. "Run and find the marshal." He didn't need to be told twice, scrambling on hands and knees toward the hallway. Florence started to follow but hesitated, torn between escape and concern for Archer, who was presumably the source of the gunfire outside. Her decision was made for her when David vaulted over the counter, landing beside her with surprising agility for a scholar. His hand closed around her wrist before she could react. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "Not without giving me what I want." Florence fought against his grip, but years of soft academic work had not prepared her for physical confrontation. David easily overpowered her, wrenching the satchel from her grasp. "Finally," he said, a gleam of triumph in his eyes as he opened the satchel and withdrew the medallion. "Do you have any idea how long Harrington has been searching for this? How much power it contains?" "It's cursed," Florence insisted, still struggling against his hold. "You of all people should know that." David laughed, a harsh sound that bore no resemblance to the gentle chuckles she remembered from their engagement. "There is no curse, Florence, only power that weak minds fear to use." He held up the medallion, its silver surface catching the light. "With this, and the right ritual during the next full moon, Harrington will be unstoppable." "You're mad," Florence whispered, truly seeing the man she had once loved for what he was, a power-hungry murderer who had betrayed everything and everyone she held dear. The gunfire outside had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that could mean either victory or defeat for Archer. Florence prayed desperately for the former as she sought some way to escape David's grasp. Her opportunity came unexpectedly. As David admired the medallion, a strange expression crossed his face: confusion, followed by pain. His grip on Florence's wrist loosened as he gasped, clutching at his chest with his free hand. What's happening?" he choked, his face contorting. Florence wrenched her arm free, scrambling backward as David fell to his knees, still holding the medallion. His eyes were wide with terror now, fixed on the silver disc in his hand. "The curse," Florence breathed, understanding dawning. "You claim to be immune, but you're not. No one is." David's face was turning blue, his breathing labored as if invisible hands were squeezing his throat. "Help me." He managed to gasp. For a moment, Florence was tempted to let the curse take him, to watch as the man who had murdered her parents and broken her heart suffered the fate he deserved. But something stopped her, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Archer's, reminding her that vengeance would only feed the cycle of violence. "Drop the medallion," she instructed, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's the medallion doing this to you." David's fingers were locked around the silver disc, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. With what seemed like tremendous effort, he managed to loosen his hold enough for the medallion to fall to the wooden floor with a soft clink. Immediately, his breathing eased, though he remained on his knees, gulping air like a drowning man pulled from the depths. Florence cautiously circled around him, retrieving the journal from her fallen satchel before backing toward the hallway that led to the rear exit. "Florence," David croaked, his voice raw, "don't leave me, please." She paused, studying the man she had once believed she would spend her life with. "Why did you do it? Why did you kill them?" "Power," he answered simply, his voice stronger now. "Your father discovered how to use the medallion, not just study it. He was going to destroy it rather than risk it being misused." His eyes narrowed. "And for that he had to die." Florence felt sick at his casual admission. "And me? Were you planning to kill me too once you had what you wanted?" "No," David replied, and for the first time she detected a flicker of genuine emotion in his eyes. "I wanted you to join us, to see the potential of these artifacts as I do." "I would never join the man who murdered my parents," Florence said coldly. "Never." "Then you'll die too," David snarled, lunging suddenly for the pistol one of his fallen men had dropped. Florence turned to flee, but she knew she wouldn't reach the hallway before David could fire. She braced herself for the impact of a bullet, but it never came. Instead, the front door of the telegraph office burst open and Archer appeared, his face grim and his rifle pointed unerringly at David. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice like steel. David hesitated, the pistol halfway to firing position. His eyes darted between Archer and Florence, calculating his chances. "I said drop it," Archer repeated, "or the next bullet goes through your skull." Slowly, David lowered the gun, setting it on the floor. "You're too late, Cowboy," he said with a smirk. "Harrington knows the medallion is here. He'll send more men, as many as it takes." "Let him," Archer replied coldly. "They'll meet the same fate as the two outside." He gestured with his rifle. "Florence, get your things. We're leaving." Florence quickly gathered the fallen medallion, carefully wrapping it in its cloth before securing it and the journal in her satchel. As she moved toward Archer, David made one last, desperate attempt, diving for the discarded pistol. Archer's rifle cracked once, the sound deafening in the confined space. David crumpled, a bloom of red spreading across his chest as he stared at Florence with shock and betrayal in his eyes. "Florence," he whispered, "I did love you, once." She watched numb, as the light faded from his eyes the second time she had witnessed his death, but this time she knew it was real. Archer gently took her arm. "We need to go. Now. The marshal will be here soon and we don't want to be answering questions." Florence nodded mechanically, allowing him to lead her out into the alley behind the telegraph office. She followed blindly as he guided her through back streets and narrow passages, away from the scene of violence and toward the outskirts of town. It wasn't until they reached the stables where Archer had left their horse that reality crashed back upon her. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Archer hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest as the first sob broke free. "He killed them," she wept, her fingers clutching at Archer's shirt. "He killed my parents for power, for the medallion." Archer held her tightly, one hand stroking her back in soothing circles. "I know," he murmured. "I heard. I'm so sorry, Florence." She cried until she had no tears left, the grief she had carried for years made fresh by the revelation of David's betrayal. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with trembling hands, she found Archer watching her with a mixture of concern and something deeper, a fierce protectiveness that both comforted and overwhelmed her. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "The telegraph." "I never sent it. We can't stay in Tucson," Archer replied. "Not now that Harrington knows where you are. We need to keep moving." He paused, thinking. "There's a mission about 2 days' ride south of here. Send Xavier Dell back. The priests there are educated men who have collected books and artifacts from all over the world. They might have information about your medallion." Florence nodded, too exhausted to argue or suggest alternatives. "All right." As Archer prepared the horse for their journey, Florence stood in the stable doorway, staring out at Tucson, the town where she had hoped to find answers, but had instead discovered only more questions and more death. "It won't always be like this," Archer said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "We will find a way to break this curse." Florence turned to him, studying the determination in his blue eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen enough of life to know that nothing lasts forever, not even curses." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "And because I meant what I said that first day, about breaking curses with love." The simple touch and the sincerity in his voice steadied her, providing an anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving my life, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Archer's eyes darkened with emotion, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. For a moment, Florence thought he might kiss her properly and realized with a flutter in her stomach that she wanted him to. But he simply nodded, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone before he stepped back. "We should go," he said, his voice slightly rough, "before the marshal starts looking for us." They left Tucson as they had entered it quietly, keeping to back roads and avoiding attention. This time, however, Florence rode before Archer rather than behind him, cradled against his chest as exhaustion and emotional turmoil finally caught up with her. She dozed fitfully as the horse carried them southward, secure in the knowledge that Archer would keep her safe. The journey to San Xavier del Bac mission took them through increasingly rugged terrain, rocky hills, and deep arroyos that provided natural protection from pursuers, but made travel slower and more difficult. They camped the first night in a sheltered canyon, similar to their previous night on the trail, but with a new awareness between them, a deepening connection forged in shared danger and mutual trust. As they sat beside their small fire, Florence finally spoke about what she had learned in Tucson. All this time, I believed the medallion had killed my parents, that the curse had claimed them as it claimed so many others. But it was David, a man I trusted, a man I planned to marry. The betrayal makes the loss even harder to bear, Archer observed quietly. Florence nodded, staring into the flames. The worst part is knowing they died for nothing, for David's ambition and Harrington's greed, not because of any curse. But the curse is real, Archer reminded her. We both saw what happened when David held the medallion. Something affected him, something beyond natural explanation. Yes, Florence agreed. The curse is real, but perhaps it's not what I thought it was. She reached for her mother's journal, which she now kept separate from the medallion for safety. I've been reviewing my mother's notes, and I think I misunderstood something important. What's that? She writes here about the dual nature of Sekhmet's power, how the goddess could both heal and harm, depending on how her energy was channeled. Florence flipped to a page marked with a scrap of cloth. And here, she mentions that the medallion was never meant to be used alone. It was part of a ritual set that included a counterbalance. The balancing element you mentioned before, Archer asked. Yes. But it's not just another artifact, it's a specific type of person. She read from the journal. The vessel of Sekhmet's wrath must be tempered by one whose heart is pure, whose love is steadfast. Without this balance, destruction follows destruction, a cascade of death that cannot be stemmed. Archer frowned thoughtfully. So the medallion needs someone with what? A loving heart, to control its power, not just any loving heart, Florence replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. My mother believed it required a specific kind of love, one strong enough to withstand death itself. Her eyes met his across the fire. Like what you said that first day, about breaking curses with love. A charged silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Archer's expression was unreadable in the flickering light, but Florence could sense the intensity of his gaze. Your mother believed love could break the curse, he said finally, not returning the medallion to Egypt. She considered both possibilities, Florence clarified. But yes, her later notes focus more on the power of love as a counterbalance to the medallion's destructive forces. She closed the journal carefully. I dismissed it as romantic nonsense, the wishful thinking of a woman who couldn't bear to believe her research might have unleashed something truly evil. But now, Archer prompted gently. Now I'm not so sure, Florence admitted. After what happened with David, the way the medallion affected him, I wonder if there might be truth in what she wrote. Archer was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. Finally, he asked, what kind of love could be strong enough to break a curse like this, to withstand death itself? Florence's heart hammered in her chest as she considered the question and the man asking it. In just a few days, Archer Kincaid had become more important to her than anyone since her parents' deaths. She trusted him, respected him, and, she realized with a mixture of wonder and terror, was falling in love with him. But was that love new and untested, strong enough to challenge an ancient Egyptian curse? I don't know, she answered honestly. But the priests at San Xavier might. They've studied ancient religions and rituals for generations. Archer nodded, accepting her redirection of the conversation. "We should rest," he suggested. "Tomorrow will be another long day of riding." As they settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Florence found herself watching Archer's profile, outlined against the starry sky. What would it be like, she wondered, to allow herself to love freely again, without fear of the curse claiming another victim? To trust that their connection might be powerful enough to break the cycle of death that had followed her for years. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, a possibility she had never allowed herself to consider, until Archer had entered her life with his steadfast courage and unexpected tenderness. Morning came with a renewed sense of purpose. They broke camp efficiently, working together with the easy coordination of those accustomed to each other's movements. As Florence secured her satchel to the saddle, she felt Archer's eyes on her and turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about love breaking the curse." Florence's heart skipped a beat. And I think your mother was onto something." His voice was low, intimate. "Some forces in this world can't be fought with guns or knives or even knowledge. They need something stronger. Like love," she whispered, scarcely daring to believe where this conversation might be leading. "Yes." Archer's hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "Florence, I know we've only known each other a short time," but the sharp crack of a rifle shot interrupted him, the bullet kicking up dust at their feet. Instantly, Archer pushed Florence behind him, drawing his pistol as he scanned the surrounding hills. "Get on the horse," he ordered, his voice transformed from tender to commanding in an instant. More shots rang out, coming from multiple directions. They were surrounded. "Archer," Florence started, fear gripping her heart. "Go," he insisted, firing back at a flash of movement on the ridge above them. "I'll hold them off." "No," she refused, grabbing his arm. "We stay together. You said we'd face everything side by side." A grim smile touched his lips. "So I did." He nodded toward the horse. "Together, then. But we need to move now." They mounted quickly, Archer in front with Florence behind him, clinging tightly to his waist as he urged the horse into a gallop. Bullets whined past them as they thundered across the open ground toward a cluster of boulders that might provide cover. Florence buried her face against Archer's back, terrified that at any moment she would feel him jerk with the impact of a bullet, that the curse would claim him as it had claimed everyone else she cared about. But they reached the shelter of the rocks unscathed, Archer guiding the horse into a narrow gap between two massive boulders. "Harrington's men?" Florence asked as they dismounted in the relative safety of the rocky enclosure. "Most likely," Archer agreed, reloading his pistol. "They must have followed us from Tucson." He peered around one of the boulders, quickly pulling back as a bullet chipped stone near his head. "At least 6 of them, maybe more. Well armed." "What do we do?" Archer assessed their situation with the cool pragmatism of a man accustomed to danger. "This position is defensible, but we're trapped. We need to find another way out." Florence looked around the rocky enclosure, noticing a narrow gap between boulders at the far end. "There," she pointed. "It might lead somewhere. Worth trying," Archer agreed. "I'll cover our retreat while you check it out." Florence squeezed through the gap, finding herself in a winding passage between towering rock formations. "It continues," she called back softly. "I think it might lead to that ravine we passed yesterday." Archer backed toward her, keeping his rifle trained on their pursuer's likely approach. "Lead the way. I'll bring the horse." The passage was narrow but navigable, forcing them to proceed in single file with Archer leading the nervous horse behind them. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant as they wound their way through the labyrinthine rocks, emerging eventually onto a steep slope that indeed led down to a ravine. "They'll figure out where we've gone eventually," Archer warned as they carefully picked their way down the slope. "But this gives us a head start." They reached the ravine floor and mounted again, pushing the tired horse as fast as they dared across the uneven ground. The mission of San Xavier del Bac was still a day's ride away, and they had no guarantee their pursuers wouldn't catch up before they reached its sanctuary. As they rode, Florence found herself thinking about the moment that had been interrupted, what Archer might have said if bullets hadn't cut short his words. Had he been about to declare feelings deeper than friendship? And if so, could those feelings truly be the key to breaking the curse that had haunted her for so long? The questions circled in her mind as the landscape changed around them, the rocky hills giving way to more open desert, dotted with saguaro cacti and mesquite trees. By midday, with no sign of immediate pursuit, they paused in the shade of a large rock overhang to rest the horse and themselves. "You think we lost them?" Florence asked, scanning the horizon anxiously. "For now," Archer replied, though his expression remained vigilant. "But they'll pick up our trail eventually. We need to keep moving." He offered her the canteen. "Drink. It's going to be a hot afternoon." As Florence sipped the warm water, she found herself studying Archer's profile, the strong line of his jaw beneath his close-trimmed beard, the creases at the corners of his eyes from years squinting against the sun, the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man accustomed to bearing heavy burdens. "You were going to say something," she said suddenly. "Before the shooting started, something about love breaking curses." Archer turned to her, surprise briefly crossing his features before settling into a more guarded expression. "This isn't the time, Florence." "When is the time?" she pressed. "Those men could catch up to us at any moment. The curse could strike without warning." Her voice softened. "If there's something you want to say, Archer, please don't wait for the perfect moment. There may never be one." He studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face as if memorizing every feature. Then, with deliberate care, he set down the canteen and took both her hands in his. "I was going to say that I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "That despite the danger, despite the curse, despite having known you for only days, I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Florence's breath caught, a mixture of joy and terror washing through her. "Archer, let me finish," he requested gently. "I know it's too soon for such declarations. I know we're in the middle of running for our lives, and I know that loving you might be the most dangerous thing I've ever done." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "But if your mother was right, if love truly is the key to breaking this curse, then I want you to know that my love is yours, freely given, without reservation or condition." Tears welled in Florence's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Everyone I've loved has died. I couldn't bear it if the curse took you too." "Then we fight it," Archer said firmly. "Together. With everything we have, including this love that's growing between us." Florence looked down at their joined hands, wondering if such a simple thing, the love between two people, could possibly overcome an ancient, powerful curse. It seemed impossible, yet a spark of hope flickered within her. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted softly, raising her eyes to meet his. "And that terrifies me more than Harrington's men or the medallion or anything else we've faced." A smile touched Archer's lips, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made Florence's heart skip a beat. "Being terrified together is better than being terrified alone," he observed wryly. The simple truth of his statement startled a laugh from her, a sound so foreign to her ears that she almost didn't recognize it as her own. When was the last time she had laughed? Years, perhaps. Since before her parents' deaths, certainly. Archer's smile widened at the sound, and something shifted between them, a barrier falling away, a connection strengthening. Without conscious thought, Florence leaned forward, closing the distance between them until their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively, but quickly deepened with shared longing. Archer's hands released hers to cradle her face gently, his touch reverent as if she were something precious and fragile. Florence's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, drawing him closer as years of loneliness and fear melted away in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Archer rested his forehead against hers. "If that's what terrified looks like on you," he murmured, "I can't wait to see what happens when you're feeling brave." Florence laughed again, the sound freer this time. "I'm not sure I remember how to be brave, but I'm willing to learn with you." The moment was perfect in its imperfection, a declaration of love made while hiding from pursuers, with danger lurking around every corner. Yet Florence wouldn't have changed it for the safest, most romantic setting imaginable. This was real as the man before her, as real as the feelings blooming in her heart. Their tender moment was cut short by the distant sound of hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. Archer tensed, immediately alert. "We need to move," he said, helping Florence to her feet. "The mission can't be more than a few hours' ride from here." They mounted quickly, Archer urging the tired horse into a steady lope that ate up the miles while preserving enough of its strength for a final burst of speed if needed. Florence held tightly to him, drawing comfort from his solid presence even as she worried about the men pursuing them and what might await them at San Xavier del Bac. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, when they crested a rise and saw the mission in the distance, a majestic white structure rising from the desert floor like a vision from another world. "San Xavier del Bac," Archer announced. The white dove of the desert. The mission was indeed as white as a dove, its Baroque architecture a startling contrast to the surrounding landscape. Two towers flanked a central dome, the entire structure adorned with intricate carvings and statuary that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," Florence breathed, momentarily forgetting their pursuers in her appreciation of the magnificent building. "And hopefully safe," Archer added pragmatically. "The Jesuits who run it have offered sanctuary to all who seek it for over 100 years. They urged their exhausted horse down the slope toward the mission, the animal finding new energy as it sensed the end of its journey. As they approached, Florence could see figures moving in the courtyard, black-robed priests and local Tohono O'odham Indians working together to tend gardens and care for livestock. One of the priests noticed their approach and moved to meet them at the gate, his expression curious but welcoming. He was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Welcome to San Xavier del Bac," he greeted them in accented English. "I am Father Ignacio. You seem to have traveled far and in haste." "We have," Archer confirmed, dismounting and helping Florence down. "We seek sanctuary and, if possible, knowledge that only learned men might possess." Father Ignacio's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Sanctuary we freely offer to all who come in peace. Knowledge we share as best we can." He gestured toward the mission. "Come. You look weary and your horse needs care." "Father," Florence said urgently, "there are men following us, dangerous men who may arrive soon." The priest's expression grew serious. "I understand. Please come inside. We will discuss this matter further once you have rested and refreshed yourselves." A young novice appeared to take charge of their horse, leading the tired animal toward the stables with gentle words and a soothing hand. Father Ignacio guided Florence and Archer into the mission itself, through a side entrance that led to a cool, dim corridor lined with doors. "We have simple guest rooms for travelers," he explained, showing them to adjacent chambers. "There is water for washing, and I will have food brought to you shortly." His kind eyes studied their faces. "Rest now. Your pursuers, whoever they may be, will not violate the sanctuary of this place." Florence wished she shared his confidence, but was too exhausted to argue. Once alone in the small, whitewashed room with its narrow bed and crucifix on the wall, she sank onto the edge of the mattress, her body suddenly reminding her of the days of hard riding and tension she had endured. A soft knock at the door preceded the arrival of a young Indian woman carrying a pitcher of water, clean towels, and a simple cotton nightgown. She smiled shyly as she set these items on a small table, then withdrew without speaking. Florence washed away the dust of travel as best she could, then changed into the offered nightgown, her own clothing being far too filthy for comfort. The satchel containing the medallion and journal she placed beneath her pillow, unwilling to let it out of her reach, even in the relative safety of the mission. Another knock announced the arrival of a tray bearing a simple but hearty meal: beans, tortillas, and some kind of stew that smelled delicious. Florence ate gratefully, realizing only as she took the first bite how hungry she truly was. She had just finished eating when a third knock came. "Yes," she called, expecting perhaps Father Ignacio or another of the mission staff. Instead, it was Archer who entered, similarly refreshed and changed into clean, if ill-fitting, clothes provided by the mission. His hair was damp from washing, and he had trimmed his beard even closer, revealing more of the strong lines of his jaw. "Father Ignacio has agreed to speak with us after evening prayers," he reported, closing the door behind him but remaining respectfully near it. "I've told him a little of our situation, enough that he understands the urgency, but not so much as to put him in danger." Florence nodded, relieved. "Did you mention the medallion?" "Only that we seek information about an Egyptian artifact with unusual properties," Archer replied. He seemed intrigued rather than alarmed. "That's something, at least." Florence hesitated, then patted the edge of the bed beside her. "Sit with me. I don't want to be alone right now." Archer crossed to join her, the narrow bed dipping slightly beneath his weight. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the events of the day, both the danger and their declaration of feelings, hanging between them like an unfinished conversation. "What happens now?" Florence finally asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. "With us, I mean." Archer took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "That depends on what we learn here. If Father Ignacio can help us understand how to break the curse, then perhaps—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps we can begin to think about a future, together." "And if he can't?" Florence pressed. "If the only solution is to return the medallion to Egypt, as my mother believed might be necessary?" "Then we go to Egypt," Archer replied simply, echoing his earlier statement. "Together." The certainty in his voice, the unwavering commitment to standing by her regardless of what challenges lay ahead, brought tears to Florence's eyes. She leaned against him, her head finding the comfortable hollow of his shoulder as if it had been designed specifically for her. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. Archer's arm came around her, drawing her closer. "Love isn't about deserving," he said quietly. "It's about choosing. And I choose you, Florence Abernathy, curse and all." She tilted her face up to his, unable to resist the pull between them any longer. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, a future that neither of them had dared imagine until now. The sound of bells ringing throughout the mission broke them apart, signaling the time for evening prayers. Archer stood reluctantly, helping Florence to her feet. "We should go," he said. "Father Ignacio will be expecting us after the service." Florence changed back into her borrowed brown dress, securing her hair beneath the shawl more out of habit than necessity now that they were safely within the mission walls. Together, they made their way through the corridors to the magnificent church at the heart of San Xavier del Bac. The interior of the church took Florence's breath away. Every surface was adorned with paintings, carvings, or statuary depicting biblical scenes and saints. The altar gleamed with gold leaf, while colorful frescoes covered the walls and ceiling in a riot of celestial imagery. They slipped into a back pew as the service was beginning, joining the small congregation of priests, novices, and local Indians in prayer. Though Florence had not attended church regularly since her parents' deaths, she found a strange comfort in the ancient rituals and Latin chants that filled the sacred space. After the service, Father Ignacio found them and led them to his study, a book-lined room filled with the comforting scent of old paper, leather bindings, and beeswax candles. He gestured for them to sit in chairs facing his desk, while he settled himself behind it. "Now," he said, folding his hands before him, "Mr. Kincaid has told me something of your situation, Miss Abernathy, but I sense there is more to the story than pursuers seeking a valuable artifact." Florence glanced at Archer, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she withdrew the leather journal from her satchel and placed it on the desk. "My parents were scholars of ancient Egyptian artifacts," she began. 3 years ago, they acquired this medallion during an excavation near Luxor." She carefully unwrapped the silver disc and set it beside the journal. "Since then, strange deaths have occurred around anyone who possesses it, including my parents." Father Ignacio leaned forward, studying the medallion with scholarly interest rather than fear. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering above it without touching. Florence nodded, watching anxiously as the priest examined the artifact, turning it carefully with a pencil to avoid direct contact. "The symbols are indeed ancient Egyptian," he observed, "though some appear to be variants I have not encountered before." He glanced up at Florence. "You believe this object is cursed?" "I know it is," she replied firmly. "I've witnessed its effects firsthand. Anyone who touches it with ill intent suffers, often fatally. My mother was researching ways to neutralize or break the curse when she died." She indicated the journal. "Her notes are incomplete, but she believed there might be 2 possible solutions: returning the medallion to its original resting place in Egypt, or—" she hesitated, glancing at Archer, "or finding a love pure enough to withstand death itself," Archer finished for her. Father Ignacio's bushy eyebrows rose. "An interesting theory, and not without precedent in many spiritual traditions." He sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. "The concept that love, true, selfless love, can overcome darkness is central to our faith as well as many others." "Then you believe it's possible?" Florence asked, hope rising within her. "That love could break this curse?" The priest considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe that divine love manifests through human connection in ways we cannot fully comprehend. Whether that manifestation can counteract what you call a curse." He shrugged slightly. "That is a matter of faith as much as knowledge." "Do you have any books or documents that might help us understand more about Egyptian artifacts like this?" Archer asked. "Particularly those associated with the goddess Sekhmet." Father Ignacio nodded, rising from his chair. "Our library is modest compared to those of European universities, but we have collected works from many traditions over the centuries." He moved to a shelf and selected several volumes. "These might prove useful. They contain accounts of artifacts believed to possess unusual properties, including some from ancient Egypt." Florence accepted the books gratefully. "Thank you, Father. This is more than I dared hope for." "There is something else you should consider," the priest said, resuming his seat. "If this medallion is as powerful and dangerous as you believe, perhaps it should remain here in sanctuary, where it can do no further harm." Florence tensed, her hand instinctively moving to protect the satchel containing the medallion. "I can't leave it. The curse would simply transfer to whoever possesses it next, you or another of the priests. I won't risk that." "The risk is ours to accept or decline," Father Ignacio pointed out gently. "No," Florence said firmly. "I've seen too many die already. I will find a way to break this curse myself." The priest studied her determined expression, then nodded slowly. "I respect your dedication, child, but remember that no burden need be carried alone." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Archer. "Sometimes the path to redemption lies not in solitary sacrifice, but in shared strength." The words resonated with Florence, echoing her mother's notes about balance and counterforce. Perhaps the solution wasn't simply love in the abstract, but the specific love between two people who chose to face darkness together. Their discussion continued late into the night, with Father Ignacio sharing what knowledge he had of ancient curses and their remedies. Though much of it was speculative or based on religious tradition rather than historical fact, Florence found herself taking careful notes, seeking patterns and connections that might lead to a solution. When they finally retired to their rooms, exhaustion claimed Florence almost immediately. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first such rest she had enjoyed since fleeing Gila Bend. Morning brought renewed hope and clarity. After breakfast in the mission's refectory, Florence and Archer sequestered themselves in a corner of the library, poring over the volumes Father Ignacio had provided. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally sharing discoveries or theories. By midday, Florence felt they were making progress. "Listen to this," she said, looking up from a leather-bound tome with excitement in her voice. According to this account from 1823, a British explorer named James Hargrove discovered a silver amulet bearing the likeness of Sekhmet in a tomb near Luxor, possibly the same tomb where my parents found the medallion. Archer leaned closer, intrigued. "What happened to him?" "He reported strange occurrences during the full moon, servants falling ill, livestock dying, unexplained fires. Eventually, he returned the amulet to Egypt, placing it in the temple where he had found it." Florence's finger traced the faded text. "After that, the misfortunes ceased," he wrote. "So returning it to its place of origin did break the curse," Archer observed. "At least in that case." "Yes, but there's more." Florence turned the page. Hargrove also noted that the amulet seemed to respond favorably to his wife's presence. When she wore it, no ill effects occurred, though she reported strange dreams and sensations of being watched. "Another piece of evidence supporting your mother's theory about a balancing force," Archer mused. "But why would Hargrove's wife be immune to the curse while others weren't?" Florence frowned thoughtfully. "The account doesn't specify, but there is a reference to her being pure of heart and intention, similar language to what my mother used in her notes." They continued their research throughout the afternoon, compiling a growing list of references to similar artifacts and their effects. A pattern gradually emerged: objects associated with Sekhmet often brought destruction, but could be controlled or neutralized by those who approached them with reverence and pure intent. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the library windows, Florence sat back with a sigh. "I think we've learned as much as we can from these sources," she admitted. "They all point to the same conclusion: Either return the medallion to its original resting place or find someone who can safely handle it without triggering the curse. And you believe that person might be me? Archer asked, his expression serious. Florence met his gaze steadily. I believe it might be us together, the love we share creating a balance that neither of us could achieve alone. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications and possibilities. Archer reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then let's test that theory, he suggested quietly. Florence's eyes widened with alarm. No, it's too dangerous. If we're wrong, we're no worse off than we are now, Archer pointed out. But if we're right, we might have found a way to break the curse without traveling halfway around the world. The logic was sound, but fear still gripped Florence's heart at the thought of Archer touching the medallion, of potentially losing him to the same fate that had claimed so many others. I can't ask you to risk that, she whispered. You're not asking, he replied gently. I'm offering, because I love you, Florence, and if that love is strong enough to break a curse, I want to know now before we make further plans. After a long moment of internal struggle, Florence nodded reluctantly. Not here, she decided. Somewhere private, away from others who might be harmed if things go wrong. They found solitude in a small courtyard garden at the rear of the mission, enclosed by high adobe walls and filled with native plants that thrived in the desert climate. The setting sun painted the scene in gold and amber as they sat together on a stone bench beside a small fountain. Florence removed the medallion from her satchel with trembling hands, unwrapping it carefully but not touching it directly, a precaution she had maintained since David's death. Are you sure about this? She asked one final time, her eyes searching Archer's for any sign of doubt. I'm sure, he replied, his voice steady. About the medallion, about us, about everything. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Florence placed the cloth-wrapped medallion on the bench between them. My mother's theory was that love, true love, could counteract the curse. That two hearts united in pure intention could handle the medallion safely. Then let's put that theory to the test, Archer said, his hand hovering above the wrapped object. Together, Florence nodded, placing her hand beside his. On the count of 3, we both touch it. If either of us feels anything strange or wrong, we let go immediately. Her voice caught. Promise me, Archer. I promise, he said solemnly. 1, Florence began, her heart pounding in her chest. 2, Archer continued, his eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. 3, they said together, and both reached for the medallion. Florence's fingers touched the cool silver surface at the same moment as Archer's, their hands meeting over the ancient artifact. She tensed, bracing for the familiar sensation of dread that had always accompanied contact with the medallion, the cold weight of the curse settling around her heart. Instead, she felt warmth. Not from the metal, which remained cool beneath her fingers, but from somewhere deeper, a spreading glow that started where their hands touched and radiated outward, filling her chest with light. You feel that? She whispered, afraid to break the moment. Archer nodded, his eyes wide with wonder. It's like sunshine. Inside. The medallion began to warm beneath their joined hands, not uncomfortably but noticeably. The strange symbols etched into its surface seemed to shift and flow, catching the last rays of the setting sun and reflecting them in patterns that danced across the courtyard walls. Look, Archer breathed, nodding toward their shadows cast by the sinking sun. Where they should have seen 2 separate silhouettes on the adobe wall, there was instead a single merged shadow, neither distinctly male nor female, but a perfect blending of both. As they watched in amazement, the shadow shifted, taking on briefly the form of a woman with the head of a lioness, Sekhmet herself, before returning to its blended human form. "The goddess," Florence whispered. "She's acknowledging us." The warmth intensified, flowing between them through their joined hands on the medallion, creating a circuit of energy that left Florence feeling more alive than she had in years. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of sorrow or fear, but of pure, overwhelming joy. "The curse," she said, her voice breaking. "I can feel it lifting, like a weight I've carried so long I forgot it was there." Archer's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I can see it in your eyes," he murmured. "They're lighter somehow, clearer." The medallion gave one final pulse of warmth beneath their hands, then cooled to normal temperature. The strange symbols ceased their shifting, settling back into their original configuration but somehow less menacing, more balanced than before. Cautiously, Florence lifted her hand, allowing Archer to pick up the medallion. He held it in his palm, studying it with a mixture of awe and relief. "It feels different," he observed. "Less hungry somehow." "The curse is broken," Florence breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. "Or at least transformed into something balanced, something that no longer seeks destruction." Archer set the medallion aside and took both her hands in his. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. Florence nodded, happiness bubbling up within her like a spring breaking through desert rock. "It means we're free, both of us. Free to live without fear, without running, without death following in our footsteps. And free to love," Archer added softly. "To build a life together if that's what you want." "It is," Florence replied without hesitation, "more than anything." He drew her into his arms then, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past days, the fear, the hope, the growing love that had somehow proven powerful enough to break an ancient curse. Florence responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she gave herself fully to the embrace. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing softly with the sheer joy of being alive and together, the stars had emerged in the darkening sky above the courtyard. "What now?" Florence asked, resting her head against Archer's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Now we decide where our future lies," he replied, his hand stroking her hair. "We could stay in Arizona territory, or go east to the cities, or even to Egypt if you still want to return the medallion to its original resting place." Florence considered the options, realizing with wonder that for the first time in years, she was truly free to choose. "I think the medallion is safe now," she said finally. "We've balanced its power, just as my mother theorized was possible, but I would like to continue my parents' work studying ancient artifacts and their properties, sharing that knowledge with others who might benefit from it." "San Francisco might be a good place for that," Archer suggested. "It's growing rapidly, with museums and universities establishing themselves, and it's far enough from Harrington's usual territory that we might avoid further trouble from him." "What about you?" Florence asked, looking up at him. "What do you want for your future?" Archer smiled, the expression transforming his face in the starlight. "I want to be wherever you are," he said simply. "The rest we can figure out together." The certainty in his voice, the unwavering commitment to their shared future, filled Florence with a happiness she had almost forgotten was possible. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at how this man, this strong, steady, loving man, had come into her life just when she needed him most. "I love you, Archer Kincaid," she whispered, "and I can't wait to see what our future holds." "I love you too, Florence Abernathy," he replied, sealing the declaration with a tender kiss. "And our future begins now." They remained in the courtyard until the desert night grew cool around them, planning their journey to San Francisco and the life they would build there. The medallion lay forgotten on the bench beside them, its ancient power now balanced, and contained by the love that had proven stronger than any curse. In the days that followed, they bade farewell to Father Ignacio and the other residents of San Xavier del Bac, promising to send word of their safe arrival in San Francisco. The priest blessed their union and their journey, offering prayers for their continued protection and happiness. "The love you share is a rare gift," he told them as they prepared to depart. "Cherish it always, for it is through such connections that the divine works its greatest miracles." With fresh supplies, a rested horse, and hearts full of hope, Florence and Archer set out westward toward California. The journey would be long and not without challenges, but they faced it together, side by side as equals, their hands frequently seeking each other's as they rode. The medallion, safely wrapped and carried in Florence's satchel, remained quiescent, its power now a source of balance rather than destruction. Florence planned to continue studying it, alongside other artifacts they might acquire. In the museum she hoped to establish in San Francisco, a fitting tribute to her parents' legacy and the knowledge they had sought to preserve. As for Harrington and his men, no further pursuit materialized. Whether they had lost the trail at San Xavier or simply decided the cost of continuing was too high, Florence and Archer never knew. But as the days passed without incident, they gradually relaxed their vigilance, allowing themselves to enjoy the journey and each other's company without the constant shadow of fear. They were married in a small ceremony in Yuma, the last major settlement, before crossing into California. The local minister was surprised by their request, but happily performed the service, with a shopkeeper and his wife serving as witnesses. Florence wore a simple white dress purchased from the town's only dressmaker, while Archer donned a new shirt and brushed his trail-worn hat until it looked almost respectable. "I wish I could give you a proper wedding," he said as they stood together outside the church afterward. "With family and friends and all the trimmings you deserve," Florence smiled, looking radiant despite the simplicity of the occasion. "This is perfect," she assured him, her fingers intertwining with his. "We have what matters most, each other." Their arrival in San Francisco in the spring of 1879 marked the beginning of a new chapter. The bustling city by the bay was growing rapidly, offering opportunities for those with vision and determination. With the modest funds Florence had managed to preserve from her parents' estate, supplemented by Archer's savings, they established a small home in a respectable neighborhood and began building the life they had dreamed of during their journey. Florence found a position as a consultant to the fledgling Museum of Natural History, where her knowledge of ancient artifacts was highly valued. Within a year, she had established her own small exhibition space dedicated to Egyptian antiquities, including the medallion now displayed safely behind glass, its story carefully edited to protect its true nature while still honoring its significance. Archer, for his part, found that his tracking and survival skills translated well to the role of expedition guide for the museum's collection efforts. His work took him away occasionally, but never for long, and he always returned to Florence with new treasures and stories to share. Their home gradually filled with books, artifacts, and mementos of their travels, a warm, eclectic space that reflected their shared passion for knowledge and adventure. And in time, it filled with something else, the sound of children's laughter. Their first child, a son they named James after Florence's father, arrived in the summer of 1881, a sturdy, blue-eyed boy with his mother's copper hair and his father's determined chin. 2 years later, Margaret joined the family, named for Florence's mother, and possessing the same scholarly curiosity that had defined her namesake. As the children grew, Florence and Archer shared with them the sanitized version of their meeting and courtship, a romantic tale of a cowboy rescuing a lady in distress, without the darker elements of curses and death that had shaped their early relationship. The medallion, they explained, was simply an important historical artifact that had brought them together. The truth remained between them, a shared secret that deepened their bond rather than dividing it. On each full moon, they would exchange knowing glances over the children's heads, silently acknowledging the anniversary of a curse broken, and a love that had proven stronger than ancient magic. Years passed, and their family prospered. Florence's small exhibition grew into a respected institution, while Archer's reputation as an expedition leader brought offers from universities and museums across the country. They traveled when they could, sometimes with the children and sometimes alone, building a life rich in experiences and connections. On the 20th anniversary of their meeting, they returned to Arizona territory, now the state of Arizona, retracing the path of their original journey. Gila Bend had grown somewhat but was still recognizable as the dusty frontier town where they had first encountered each other. The saloon still stood, though under new ownership, and Mrs. Holloway's house had been expanded into a proper boarding establishment. They visited San Xavier del Bac, finding Father Ignacio still serving the mission, though now bent with age and relying on a cane to navigate the corridors he had once strode through with vigor. He remembered them immediately, his weathered face lighting up with genuine pleasure at their return. "I knew you would find your way," he said, clasping their hands in his. "The light of love shines from both of you, stronger even than when you left here 2 decades ago." They showed him photographs of their children, James, now a young man of 18, preparing to attend university in Boston, and Margaret at 16, already showing promise as a scholar in her mother's footsteps. "They are your true legacy," the old priest observed. "More precious than any artifact, more enduring than any curse." Florence smiled, leaning against Archer's shoulder as she had done countless times over the years. "We have been blessed," she agreed. "In more ways than I ever dreamed possible when I stumbled into that saloon in Gila Bend, terrified and alone." "Not as blessed as I have been," Archer countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Finding you was the beginning of everything good in my life." They spent one last night in the mission before continuing their journey, sleeping peacefully in the same guest rooms they had occupied 2 decades earlier. As moonlight filtered through the small window, Florence watched Archer sleeping beside her, his face relaxed in repose, silver now threading through his hair at the temples. "I love you," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." In the morning, they bid farewell to Father Ignacio, promising to visit again but knowing in their hearts that this might be the last time they saw the elderly priest. As they rode away from the mission, Florence glanced back at the white towers gleaming in the morning sun. "It was here that everything changed," she reflected, "where we broke the curse and found our future." Archer followed her gaze, then looked ahead to the path before them. "The curse was broken the moment you trusted me enough to let me help you," he said. "Everything else was just confirmation of what we already knew in our hearts." Florence smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. Their love had been the key not just to breaking a curse, but to building a life filled with purpose and joy, challenges overcome and victories shared. "Then I'll break every curse with love," she quoted softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her on that first day in Gila Bend. Archer's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "And so we have," he agreed. "So we always will." Together they rode toward the horizon, their love a beacon guiding them home, not to San Francisco or Arizona or any physical place, but to each other. For in the end, they had discovered what Florence's mother had theorized long ago. That love, true and steadfast, was the most powerful force in the world, stronger than curses, stronger than death, stronger than anything that sought to divide them. And in that love, they had found not just redemption, but a legacy that would endure long after the medallion was forgotten, a legacy of courage, commitment, and the unwavering belief that some connections transcend even the most ancient and powerful magic. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and flourish. James married a fellow scholar he met at Harvard, following in his grandparents' academic footsteps, but with a focus on archaeology rather than Egyptology. Margaret chose a different path, becoming a physician when few women entered the medical profession. Her determined spirit a perfect blend of her mother's intelligence and her father's practicality. Florence and Archer watched their children's journeys with pride, offering guidance when asked, but respecting the independence they had both valued so highly in their own lives. They welcomed grandchildren with joy, creating new traditions while sharing carefully edited versions of the family history that preserved the wonder without the darker elements. The medallion remained on display in Florence's museum, its power dormant but not forgotten. Occasionally, visitors with particular sensitivity would comment on a strange warmth or energy they felt when viewing it. But for most, it was simply an interesting artifact from a distant civilization. Only Florence and Archer knew its true nature and how love had transformed a curse into a blessing, a burden into a gift. That knowledge remained their private touchstone, a reminder of how far they had come and the forces that had brought them together. As they entered their golden years, they traveled less but enjoyed their home and community more, surrounded by friends, family, and the treasures of a life well lived. Archer's hair turned fully silver, while Florence's copper locks faded to a soft auburn streaked with white. But their eyes remained clear and bright, filled with the same love that had sustained them through decades together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories, Archer took Florence's hand as they stood before the medallion's display case in the museum that bore her name. "I told you I would break every curse with love," he said softly, for her ears alone. "But I never imagined how much love would come back to us in return." Florence squeezed his hand, her heart as full as it had been on that day in the mission courtyard when they had first broken the curse. "That's the true magic," she replied. "Not in ancient artifacts or mysterious powers, but in choosing to love, day after day, through everything life brings." Archer smiled the same smile that had first captured her heart in a dusty saloon half a century earlier. "I would choose you again," he said simply. "In every life, in every world, I would find you and choose you again." "And I you," Florence promised, sealing the words with a kiss that held 50 years of shared joys and sorrows. Challenges overcome and victories celebrated, a love that had indeed proven stronger than any curse, more enduring than any ancient magic. They walked out of the museum hand in hand, into the California sunshine, and the waiting embrace of their family, the greatest treasure they had found on their long journey from that fateful day in Gila Bend, when a desperate woman had whispered, "I'm cursed," and a steadfast cowboy had replied, "Then I'll break every curse with love." And so he had. So they both had. Not just once, but every day, with every choice to trust, to forgive, to persevere, to believe in each other and the life they had built together. In the end, that was the true legacy of Florence and Archer Kincaid, not the artifacts they had collected or the institutions they had built, but the love they had chosen, again and again, that continued to ripple outward through the generations. breaking curses and creating blessings wherever it touched. A legacy of love, stronger than any curse, more powerful than any magic, more enduring than time itself.